Welcome back, everyone. I'm Shane Combs. He's Matt Combs. We're here on Expanding the Zone. This is show 68. Last week, Matt, we were talking confidence on show 67. Appreciate all the fan feedback as we're talking some different things on social media. You can find us by using the SVC Sports Zone out there on Twitter, Facebook, here on YouTube. If you're on the podcast app, check us out on YouTube. Same way, if you're on the YouTube watching us, thank you. Make sure you have us on the podcast app as well. And Matt, one of the big things last week is we were telling some Dottie Neff stories at our confidence show. I know we've had some great feedback there, and a lot of people with Coach Neff that go way back. I was thinking maybe in the upcoming baseball season, we're going to have to make it a rule on expanding the zone. We may have to have one Coach Neff nugget per show or something like that. So I'll have to work on that. But obviously, we could do an entire series on the great Hall of Fame coach and everything he means to me. I know I appreciate everything he's done for me over the years, and it's so neat to think back and all the fun stories, but all the different lessons that go with them. So that was a lot of fun. And another thing that's fun, Matt, we should probably mention before we get going. You and I have had a neat opportunity this week on the radio dial. It's 100.9 FM at 7:30 in the morning. Monday through Friday, Matt and I have had a cool opportunity to be a part of Up and Adam Sports, a new segment there on the radio. Throughout those 5 days, Matt and I kind of split the job in terms of going on with JJ Hill, but that's been a lot of fun, Matt. I know I've enjoyed it. What you have a quick thought on that before we get going here this week?
Yeah, it's been fun, doing some live radio. We're always used to the podcasting, realm, and the short 10-minute shows can kind of a neat format for us. We've never done it before, just kind of hitting day to day scores and what happened the night before, um, and then even some days, getting to talk a little bit of, some brief thoughts on some different subjects, in
Hmm.
addition just to covering the local high school sports. But yeah, it's been fun. I look forward to it. I think it's going to be something that, um, over time leads to a lot of interesting topics. And, we appreciate the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, no question. Always check us out 7:30 on your way to work. Get your high school scores, some college take, some professional take throughout the year. Obviously, sports headlines change, and we try to cover a little bit of everything. So, yeah, a lot of fun. Appreciate JJ allowing us to be a part of that. Again, that's 100.9 FM, 7:30 in the morning, Monday through Friday. Check that out. Up and Adam Sports. Well, Matt, here on show 68, as always, we thank Dr. Chris Good for all the support on the YouTube channel. This week, we're kind of emptying the notebook a little bit. Some basketball observations. I think the way we talked about it and our thoughts going into the week for show prep, just it's what we have seen throughout all the basketball throughout the year. And I'll kind of pass it to you. I know you've kind of been putting a collection of headlines or topics, maybe would be the better thing to say, throughout. I'll just kind of let you take the lead this week. You throw one out at a time, and I'll kind of give a feedback. We'll discuss it as we see fit, and then we'll just move on down your list.
Yeah, Shane, sometimes I think we have a lot of things come up people will ask us about, or we, just observe or whatever. And sometimes they're topics that wouldn't necessarily make for an entire show, right? But they're just topics that we think that are interesting enough to talk about for a few minutes. And so I've kind of, over time we've been listing these as people have said stuff to us or whatever, and we just thought it would be a nice show, a nice way to do a show here before we get into some shows as we get closer to a tournament, some all league stuff we're going to do. Some discussions like that. We just figured we'd do kind of several random thoughts here and just kind of go with it. So no particular order here, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you is if you had to pick Shane, one thing offensively and one thing defensively, all right, that really stands out to you that cause teams problems, let's say, all right. So like if I said to you, what do you feel like the number one offensive problem has been that you see teams go through? Or what do you feel like the number one defensive issue that you see rearing its head time and time and time again? Like as you watch a lot of basketball, right? You watch boys, you watch girls, you watch games on film, you watch games live. You know, if you had to pick one on each side of the ball, and I guess let's start with defense. Okay, you were always a kind of a defensive guy. When you coach, that was your thing. Um, what if you had to put your finger on one thing you see as you watch teams play, good teams, bad teams, mediocre teams? What are when you see them have defensive problems, what comes to mind?
It's interesting. The first half of my career, I was a lot more in the player development and probably more on the offensive side. And you're right, here in the second half of my career, the last couple staffs that I've been a part of, I've been a little bit more on the defensive side. So my eye does happen to kind of pay attention to some of those scouting reports and some of those different things a little bit. And I think a lot of these things that we talk about when we talk offense, defense, adjustment, whatever we're going to talk about, there's probably a foundation that I come back to in terms of we've talked about it here on the expanding zone of identity. I think a lot of times when you don't understand who you are and what you do, I think it's very difficult to have a foundation of the principles that you based on. So like what I mean by that is when I watch people play defensively, I think they can really get caught in the middle of of what they want to accomplish. Does that make sense? So
Right,
like when I talk identity, when you say what causes people problems, I think it's when a team does something really really well. You know what I mean? And they understand all five people. They go to the bench. They understand. This is how we guard. This is what we want to do. This is how we handle ball screens. This is how we handle cross screens. If it's a zone, this is how we handle cuts. This is how we handle overloads. And and there's a real simplicity to the way they go about playing it. I think that the people that I see struggle a lot of times are the people that get caught in the middle in terms of identity. They go about constantly looking for a tweak here, constantly looking for a tweak there, and there's always an area for that. But I'll be honest, Matt, the thing that causes people, I think, gives offenses the most problem is a team that's just really really good at what they do. You know what I mean? And it's
right.
I think we can think of the programs. I can think of certain programs I could be like, oh wow, that team's really always played a really good 1-3-1, or that team's always been really good man. That team switches. That team does this. Um, and and I think that's what I come back to, and it's that physicality, and it's the brand that you play with too. Sometimes it's just a simple effort thing. Let's face it, you hate to play against the teams that play really hard. You know what I mean? Like you
Right.
had those teams on your schedule, I bet at Benton County, where you're like, "Daggone, man, they're going to get after us for 32 minutes." Or I think we're better than them, but man, they're going to play so hard for 32 minutes. So a lot of times when I think of those characteristics, I think is something as simple as effort. I think is the physicality. And yeah, I joked with someone the other day, man, if you're consistently getting in foul trouble in today's game, you're a hack. I
Yeah,
mean, or to
yeah.
foul, you know what I
Oh
mean? Like they
yeah.
don't call fouls. So like, if it's great positioning, it's great technique. But I love watching teams who know exactly who they are on the defensive end, and they stay true to that identity, and they play. That might dance around your question a little bit, but I think it's when I think of what gives people fits, I kind of come back to that particular thing, just being in real sound in what you do.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I think identity is important. We talk about it all the time because I think it's hard to be really really good at something to begin with, and if you don't have if you don't know what you're even trying to do, you know what I mean? It's kind of like to get really good at it, you need to know what you want to do and then rep it all the time, right? And so I think that having that identity is crucial. One of the things I've noticed that cause defenses to break down. So I'm going to look at it from this other point. Like when I see defensive mistakes, okay, um, I I know this sounds super simple, but as I watch teams play, it's the same thing all the time. It's the inability just to guard the ball, just to guard the ball handler, just to stop the drive. I Every game I go to, when I see a team give up a lot of points, when I see a team struggle, it always starts, Shane. It seems like to me just not being able to guard the ball, whatever defense you decide to play. And I watch a lot of teams play, and it's so many different reasons too, right? I mean, it's guys that just go out and overplay. Maybe they're trying to play tighter than what their ability allows them to, right? Sometimes it's not a good closeout. Sometimes it's out of position, so you're a step behind. One of the things I see, Shayne, all the time now too is just, you know, there's a philosophy by most coaches now, I think, to try to keep the ball on one side of the floor, right, on defense, and try to force the ball toward the baseline. And I see this all the time too. And I don't know whether it's not being taught correctly or guys just aren't executing it correctly. But how many times do you see forcing baseline, which, without video here to show you, means really what you're trying to do is take the ball from the wing as a defensive player and force it toward the corner or the short corner, 15-ish feet, right, and get it stuck down on the baseline. And what's happening all the time is guys are just driving baseline and going right to the rim and shooting a layup. And
Mhm.
I watch guys' footwork and positioning, instead of having their chest parallel to the sideline and forcing it down the
Mhm.
line, you'll see their you'll see their butt almost facing half court, if that makes sense. They're opened up to the
Mhm.
point where it's like, here, coach told me to force baseline, so here you go. You can have the baseline. That's not what coaches are trying to teach, right? So there's
Mhm.
some misunderstandings, I think. How about this, Shayne? When you start talking about guarding the ball, when we were kind of coming up through back in the day, and you had your two-man games, your pick and rolls, almost everybody guarded it the same. Did you ever notice that? It was like, okay, here we go. We've got a pick and roll. We're gonna hedge it. We're gonna help and recover. We're gonna show, whatever you want to call it. I'm gonna kind of help here until my teammate can get under the pick. And now think about it. There's a million ways, it seems like, to guard a ball screen. Do you switch it? Do you ice it? Do you trap it? Do you hard hedge it? There's all these different things. Do you think sometimes, Shayne, we outthink ourselves sometimes when it comes to guarding the ball? Do you think sometimes we just need to say, look, we got to keep the ball in front? I mean, let's not force it here or force it there or do it. Let's just not let them drive it to the basket. I think sometimes when I watch teams play, kids are, because I see good athletes getting beat off the dribble too. Like, are kids overthinking it? You see what I'm saying? Are they thinking and not reacting?
Mhm.
Um, but there's got to be a reason, and I know guys are better athletes today than ever, so they're harder to guard. But the guys guarding them are better athletes too, right? So why are we getting beat off the dribble all the time, do you think?
Well, I think there's 3 things that I was kinda jotting down here as you were talking, because it kinda goes back to that foundation, what I was saying. I think it comes back to a terminology thing. Like, a big thing for me is I never wanted to dribble to touch the paint. Letting the ball into the middle, it just was like a gut punch. That was something that was just constantly harped on. So once you understand that terminology, it goes back to exactly what you said. It comes down to not necessarily an athleticism thing, it comes down to a technique thing in terms of setting your feet. I like what you said about keeping the ball in front, but again, I never liked force the term forcing it to the baseline because I never wanted to give up baseline. I like what you said. I wanted to force it to the corner, force it to the short corner, and kill it. So yeah, I think you're talking the third thing I would say. So I would talk about identity in terms of what are you trying to accomplish, two, the technique, but then the third thing, you and I touched on this back at the beginning of our basketball season here. I think it's the IQ and the understanding of scouting report. It's the film work and all those things. Because what I noticed, Matt, is kids don't understand who they're guarding. I was just watching a girls' game a couple weeks ago. Got a young lady on the one team I was watching who's hit like 53s on the year, and it was like three or four defenders on the other team wasn't quite aware of that, which I know they were, you know what I mean? Like, they were made aware of it, but, like, there's no urgency. There's no so I always talked about how you have to have 3 types of closeouts. You have to have a run them off the line at all cost. You have to have kind of, in the middle, and then you have to have "Hey, we wanna make sure we're a little softer, play the drive," right? So we wanna know that green, yellow, red type of closeout. And we wanted to be real clear. And we talked about all kids knowing all kids, because even though we may have our matchups, the way the game of basketball is played in transition or different things, you there's certain shooters you just can't leave. So I think what you're talking about goes back to what is it you do, what is the technique that's taught, and then is there an IQ that understands the intangibles of what you're trying to do. And I think if you can master those 3 things on the defensive end, I, I'm I'm an open-minded basketball guy. I understand some people play man and stay with their man all the way through. I know some people play man and switch. I know some people are zone people. I know some people zone trap. Whatever it is, I guess I would go back to, is there a consistent language? Is there consistent technique? And then is there a consistent knowledge of who you're guarding and how you're guarding?
Yeah, that's it's interesting conversation. I mean, we can it's just fun to talk X's and O's, or at least it is for you and I, hopefully listeners too. But just talking like some of those specific things when it comes to the just the strategies of defense. Flip it over to the offensive side, Shane, because I think some of what we just talked about too can lead into the offense discussion from the standpoint of how important it is to have an identity on the offensive end too, right? And who you want to be and how you want to play. And just like you said, teams can get caught in the middle defensively. I think teams can get caught in the middle sometimes offensively too, right? Um, what are some of the things you've seen offensively, whether it be you can look at it either way you want to approach it, whether it be something that you think teams mistakes you see teams make, or maybe things offensive actions teams run that cause other teams a lot of problems. I mean, take it however you want to go. Let's jump to the offensive side for a second.
Yeah, this is one I've thought a lot about over the last 2 weeks for some reason. So I may dance around this a little bit. We'll just have discussion back and forth, but see if you follow my thought process here. When when we were talking about on the show a couple weeks ago about continuity offense, I think it was the positionless basketball podcast
Right.
we were doing, and
Right.
we are talking about continuity back and forth. And what I see is I see a lot of teams asking their third, fourth, and fifth options on the floor to do far more than they're physically capable of. And what it's doing is it's highlighting weaknesses, and it's leading to mistakes, and it's leading to just a lack of rhythm on the offensive end. And I guess to piggyback on that thought, I would also say this to get your response. I think sometimes, and I'll tell you, I noticed this far more in my assistant roles over the years when I was able to be an assistant. I think you see it through a whole different lens. I think sometimes we're guilty of thinking everything's an X and O fit when sometimes it's like a get in the gym and get better fix. So what I mean by that is, you know, I watched a team the other night. They were facing a 1-3-1 trap. Well, they were in a pretty standard 2-1-2 look, and they were in the right spots. They were getting what I call that three diagonal look, right? The point guard was coming up, not crossing the half court. They were getting a guard behind. They were getting a good flash into the middle, good sideline look. And they were doing okay, but a lot of times I see coaches thinking it's an X and O fix when in reality sometimes it's as simple as, well, what do we need to do better? Well, we need to ball fake better, we need to pivot better, we need to not stare past them. You see what I'm saying? Like
Right.
sometimes it's not a call timeout, put five kids in five different spots. I'm not saying there's not tweaks on how we're going to reverse it or where we're going to cut, or hey, I see this open, I want to make this adjustment. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is, so many times I'll see an offensive team struggle, and they'll go back to Monday's practice, and they'll think they need to put in three new quick hitters, or hey, well, let's just scrap the offense and run this offense. Or when in reality, it may just be we just need to work on our skill sets a little bit more. And like I said, take that into consideration on what I'm saying. Where sometimes I think in some of these offenses that ask kids to dribble and create more. I think,
Mm-hmm.
is that fair? In today's
Oh
time,
yeah.
we try
No
to
doubt.
create more off the dribble than we
Yes.
do with the pass and cut and movement. And I think it's forcing some of those role players into doing a little bit more. So I know I kind of went two or three different directions there, but I was trying to bring it back to a common point. Do you follow a little bit what I'm saying there?
Yeah, and honestly, Shane, and we don't like we always tell people we don't go over this together before the show. It kind of leads into what I've seen too. I think what you're talking about maybe causes what I'm getting ready to talk about, which is I see when I see teams struggle to score, the two things that jump out to me the most are, and you could lump this into one thing called just not valuing the ball, right? Not valuing the possession, but specifically specifically, it would be those careless turnovers, okay? Like maybe you could even say unforced, or those turnovers that are just didn't need to happen, and shot selection. So both those things to me, when you take bad shots or you have careless turnovers, waste possessions, right? You only get so many possessions a game. Let's say you get 65 possessions, 60 possessions. Well, if you have 15 turnovers and 10 bad shots, you know what I mean? Now you've got 35 possessions. So what I'm saying is, it is I see a lot of that, and it could be, Shayne, it could be a little bit of what you're saying in terms of, are we putting kids in positions that they can't be successful in? Like, are we putting the ball into the hands of a kid who can't pass very well and ask him to stand at the top of the key and find a way to reverse it, or catch it on the press breaker? And you know what I mean? And are we putting him in a situation where he can't do that? Because let's face it, basketball, there's going to be, there's going to be some turnovers. Not every turnover is just an awful turnover. I mean, you're playing a fast, crazy game in a small space, and there's 10 people out there, and look, the turnovers are going to happen, but I don't think every turnover is created equally. I think sometimes you got the mental ones, the physical ones, you got the ones that are careless. Shot selection, the same way. You know, when I was typing my notes for this show, I don't know why I'm going to share this, but I guess maybe this goes to my lack of maturity, whatever. But when I'm typing my notes for this show, I type in shot selection, and for some reason, my phone spell checked it to another SH word, selection. All right. And I thought that might be apropos for what I've seen this year with some shot selection. We might refer to it that way. That's very accurate. No, but like, in all honesty, Shayne, take a second and just tell me, and then we can dive a little further into to the shot selection in terms if you want. But like, do you see a correlation with that in the sense of, if we are putting kids in positions they're not their skill level doesn't allow them to be successful in, is it obviously it could lead to turnovers, right? And could it even lead to some bad shots because kids don't real well? I'm here, I'm open, I've got. Do you see where I'm meshing those two together a little bit?
Well, it puts you in a state of panic, or a state of, I want to do something. Remember the drill that Coach Lovely used to do in high school that we hated, but it had its purpose of learning how to not turn it over and get a shot. Remember, like when you'd be at a complete disadvantage, there'd be like three offensive guys playing against four or five defensive guys, and you couldn't get out of the drill until you got shot up.
A good shot, like a clean shot,
Well,
like,
in
and
terms
and
of,
and, and, and
if
and
Coach
the team.
Lovely was in the wrong mood, he had his definition of
Oh
what he
yeah,
called a good
and the
shot.
team I played on, we thought every shot was a good shot. You know what I mean? So we had some
Right.
disagreements there.
So, but my point is, I think sometimes, and there's obviously a lot of good to that, but I think sometimes you do get some of those kids of like, well, I'm open, I might as well shoot it. Well, some nights, depending on the sky report, there might be a reason you're open,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's one of those things that it's. I guess I'd go back to my original point. I would love to get your thought. Like, does your skill set work match what you're doing in practice? Okay, so like for example, I know you had a long stretch of success with some great ball handlers, and you ran a lot of dribble drive action. Well, I assume in your skill set work, you worked on a lot of jump stop and pivot and a lot of handoff. And what was a handoff like? What was a pitch like? How are you going to get the angle and get downhill off the all of those things, right? So I would challenge people. I would challenge people to take a look at their skill work and versus what they run. Yeah, the one thing I notice now in today's game, where there's so much dribbling going on, something as simple as just setting a screen to get a kid open. Like, a lot of people are not good screeners. A lot of people do not use screens well. Is that a skill that's under taught? You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So it's not that, hey, I need to go back to the drawing board and draw a better play. Well, no, not really. You just need to teach screening better. I hate to make it so simple, but sometimes when I watch it, I'm like, hey, that was a really good play right there. And he or she just set a poor screen, or he or she didn't wait on the screen. It was there. So am I making that too simple, or do you follow a little bit of what I'm saying?
No, I think it's accurate, and I think that I do think in a span of a basketball season, because a lot of this development has to be in the off season, right? So I think sometimes during the season obviously we can help kids improve to a certain extent, but I think as coaches we have to understand too, this guy may be who he is. You know what I mean? If I've got a senior and we're 10 games in, am I going to be able to change him to the point where, so I think the X and O side of it, Shayne, your system, right, has to match who you have. But yeah, within that system, if your system is motion style offense where you're going to be setting some screens, shouldn't you be working on that every day, right? There should be
Hmm.
pick drills or some kind of screen drill every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, no,
Well,
I
and let me clarify. I didn't mean
yeah,
to interrupt you there, but like,
no, go ahead.
I agree with what you're saying. If a kid needs to just dribble better, or he or she needs to get better with their offhand, you're right. Throughout the season, there's a ceiling on what you're going to hit there, right? That's more of an off season, year round thing. I guess I'm even breaking it down to a simple thing of, you know, hey, you need to set this angle on the screen better. You need to jump stop better. That's what I mean by sometimes that play didn't work. We need to scrap it. No, 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 not really. It was a great play. What you need to do is jump stop and then open up on that handoff. And I'm talking about just some of the technicality of some footwork, of some angles, some different things like that. I see a lot of times where I see some really clever, really good X's and O's that I like, and it's not an X and O problem. It's a simple execution of detail problem.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I think what we're seeing here late in the year, I don't know about you, Shayne, but I'm seeing some teams who early in the year didn't do some of those things, right? Late in the year have gotten better at some of those things. And I think that's a credit probably to those teams' coaches.
Mhm. Absolutely.
It's fun for me when I watch a team come in and play, you know, play our school, let's say in the second week of the season, and then we turn around then and we see them here toward the end of the season, and sometimes you'll say, boy, that team's gotten way better since the beginning of the year. Or sometimes you say, oh, I don't know. I mean, that team seems to be going in the
Mhm.
wrong direction, right? And I think maybe some of what you're saying is true with that. Is are you making some of those um, individual skill development improvements to help your system, or are you just like you said, constantly grasping at straws? Well, that didn't work. Let's try this. That didn't work. Let's try this. And as we know, that typically doesn't work. I mean, when you just start looking for a magic solution. So yeah,
Well, I just wanted to throw this at you. I guess this is more of a defensive one that comes to mind, but I think if whoever's listening could apply this to any part of the game. Let's go back to what you're saying about the ball screen. I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, how are we going to handle the ball screen? And most of the teams I taught, we probably had a reputation of a real hard hedge recover. Now, when you do that, there's things that, like any defense, you take away certain things, but then you open up certain things as well. Um, and I had a lot of coaches say, "Are you worried that you don't have a second or third or fourth way?" And I guess the answer is yes. I mean, you always worry about those things, but I got to the point where I understood how hard it was to perfect that one thing that we did program wide. So, like all the way down to our seventh girl on the JV team, she understood, oh, I have to go hedge this ball screen. Does that make sense? So like
right,
we at least became really, really good. And it forced the ball handler to keep the dribble alive, to make the extra pass. And then there had to be another pass. Are there things that we had to get in rotation down? And so yes, but I think what I see sometimes is I see teams that do try to do three, four different things against ball screen. I'm just using ball screen as a basketball example. And I don't know if they do any of them very well. You know what I'm saying? Now,
right.
the advantage is they have some different looks and maybe it's hard to scout and you don't know what's coming or whatever. But I think fill in the blank with any basketball topic you want to talk on offense, defense. I guess it goes back to the old school thought, okay, I'm going to do this one thing really well, or I'm going to try to get my entire roster to do like these five things. And I don't know which one we're going to be good at. And I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying. When do we adjust? How do we adjust? And you kind of get your head spinning a little bit. Do you follow what I'm saying? I just wanted to clarify that that's a great basketball discussion when we start talking offense defense here.
Well, yeah, because I'll be honest with you, Shayne. Over the years, I've done different things with different teams I've had. I've had teams that were so good defensively man to man that we never played a possession of zone, right? But then I've had teams that couldn't do that no matter
Right.
how hard we worked at it, because you got to, because the flip side of what you're saying too,
You can get stubborn. Yeah.
stubborn. That's exactly the word I was getting ready to say, because you can
Yeah.
also say, well, by God, this is what we do and I'm going to do it. And,
Yeah.
and, look, I mean, I think as a coach, you have to eventually say, hey, we've tried to do this. It's not working. Is there something we can do? And none of us want to admit that our teams just aren't quite good
Mm.
enough to do what we thought they could do. And we think
Right.
sometimes that if I try this or I try this, I'm just giving up, right? I'm giving
Right.
up on, and I just don't buy that necessarily. You get this deep into the season, um, and you realize you can't get it done, then you try something different. I mean, that's good coaching, I think. And I think some teams, if you're not really, really good at one thing, yeah, I do think there's something to be said for on defense. Okay, you know what? Let's switch our defenses a little bit. I mean, maybe we're not going to be great at one defense, but let's see if we can
Hmm.
keep the other team off balance by
Sure.
let's play zone this trip. Let's play man this trip. Hey, let's press one possession. Let's play some kind of junk defense one possession, right? Let's go triangle and two one time or box and one time. Let's just throw a lot of things at the other team to see if we can keep them off balance, because maybe we're not good enough, or maybe you're always an underdog, right? What if you're that team that's just hardly ever the favorite? You're young, you're just inexperienced. Every single time you go out there, you're up against what seems like just a giant task, right? And let's do we just go out there and just take our beating and just because it's easy to say let's do what we do, right? Sometimes I think that's a cop out, by the way, but for some guys, or do we make some adjustments? So it is a fascinating conversation, Shane, because I see merit to both of those things. And again, how often do we say it on the show? It kind of comes down to your individual situation, your talent level, your experience level on your team. There's just so many things that go into this. I mean, this is why I've said before, coaching will always be more of an art than a science. And
Hmm.
and we can be as analytical as we want to be, which I've said before, I love analytics, but there's still an art to this. There's still a gut feeling that happens with a coach. There's still little things that you observe that, why did you do that? Well, just because I had a feeling, you know,
Well,
doesn't
don't you think it
doesn't
has
sound
something to
very
do with
scientific, but
what about how old your team is? Because I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me with that older group that you think is right there on the verge or you're trying to get something out of 'em. I think when I was a younger head coach, and I was a really young head coach, but I got stuck in the middle of what you're talking about some nights. I worked so hard to game plan. On most nights, we were an underdog, and we played some really competitive 3.5 quarter games and just couldn't always get over the hump. But when I looked back, I felt like we got to the end of the year and I'm like, man, the identity I was hoping to have in the program, I don't know that I trusted the process moving forward. With a younger team, if I had it to do over, I think I would have stayed a little bit more stubborn and stayed the
right.
course. Whereas what you're saying, I've also had groups before where you're a little bit older, and I think it's like, hey, this is kind of who we are, and we need to figure out a way to compete. I think it kind of goes back to that saying I've used before on the podcast here. It's an ego thing. I'm not. You can't have an ego. You're not trying to be right. You're trying to get it right. You know what I mean? As a coach, you have to, okay, what's my what's my program goal moving forward? But at the same point, how do I give this team an opportunity to grow and feel like they have a chance to compete night in, night out? That's an incredible balance that I think every coach has to face at some point in his or her career.
Yeah, no question. And we're sitting here right now, and I think this kind of segues into one of our other topics that I had down for tonight too, Shane. But like, we're talking about adjustments, really, is what we're talking about, right? Do you make what adjustments do you make? When to adjust, when not to adjust? And we're talking about that more in terms of like throughout the season, right? But let's
Mhm.
talk for a minute about in-game adjustments, because this is something that came up too, and that I was asked about one night when I was standing around just talking to another guy that I know, and he said, some teams seem to do way better with in-game adjustments. Like coach calls a timeout, right? And I can see what they did. And I tell you how this came up. I said to this guy, I said it was after halftime, and I said I always like, and when I go to watch a game, just as like a an observer, neutral observer, or even if I'm rooting for one team or whatever, but I'm not super involved, I'm just kind of standing there watching. What what's what does each coach do at halftime? You know what I mean? Like when they come out of halftime, like is it obvious what the adjustment was? If there's an adjustment, I mean, sometimes it's a lopsided game or whatever, and maybe the winning team doesn't have to adjust anything, right? But if it's a close game or whatever, what adjustments did that coach make at halftime? And then better yet, Shayne, even out of a timeout, right? Like
Hmm.
what adjustments are made out of a timeout? Which teams can do that well? Which teams don't? Um, I guess you can go anywhere you want with this. I've got a couple thoughts on my theory as a coach about adjustments out of a timeout, things like that, or even halftime. But what have you seen on this? I mean, obviously, some people do it better than others. I mean, some coaches do it better than others. Some teams do it better than others. But what do you think factor into that either the success or the failure of in-game adjustments?
Well, I think this has a lot to do with coaching, and I think we as coaches, we have to look ourselves in the mirror in this area if we want to get better at our craft. I mean, how many times are we telling our kids, if you want to get better at your craft, work at it, right? If you want to be a better free throw shooter, how about you get here early, stay late, and get some extra free throws up, and really focus in on getting better. If you want to get better at that left hand, let's put a little extra time into it. Same way here. I think coaches have to trust their preparation. And if you're going to trust your preparation, you better have preparation, right?
Right.
It comes back to what we're doing right here. I think coaching chemistry is important. I think coaching staff is important. Having extra eyeballs, extra voices, and the staff that understands his or her role. Is someone in charge of out of bounds plays? Is someone in charge of defense? Is someone in charge of offense? Someone in charge of rebounding, whatever it may be, so that people are very specific. Because I don't know how you feel, but man, that quick minute in the huddle or that quick 10 minutes in the locker room can go in a hurry, right? If you don't have a structure and a way you go about making your adjustments.
Right.
So I think a lot of those game management things, I would call them, kind of go back to your preparation. Remember the one time on expanding the zone here, we talked about foul trouble, for example. And I know
Right.
that's not quite a game adjustment, but in a way, it can be something that impacts a decision a coach makes. And we are talking a lot of times of, I think those are discussions you have to have as a coach away from the emotion. How are we going to handle two fouls in the first quarter? Are we a two foul first quarter, three foul second quarter, four foul third quarter, play till you foul out in the fourth quarter? Or are we a little bit more of we're going to try to survive the half at two, three in the third, four? You see what I'm saying? Like there's
Right.
different aggressive. So not just in foul trouble, but how you handle that. When am I going to call a timeout? Am I more like I coached with an outstanding basketball coach, Eric Snyder. I'd always make fun of him. If he was coaching in a game where he felt like he was an underdog, he may call three timeouts first quarter
Right.
because he'd talk about, yeah, I once watched him call a timeout down 8, down 10, down 12. But if you think about it, what he'd always say is he'd be like, if I'm down 25 to that team, does it matter that I have four timeouts left? You know what I mean? Like I was
Right.
trying to help the kids.
Right.
So it's a lot of those in-game adjustments are also game management things, and then once you call those timeouts or once you're in the locker room, like you said, now it becomes a little bit more of an X's and O's and a little bit thing, but I know you put a lot of time into preparation, and that's something that I love film. I love the preparation side of it, and a lot of times I felt like I made some of my best calls when I already kind of knew what I was looking for and I knew what I might have to adjust. Does that make sense? Like I went into a game thinking, okay, I'd like to try this. And then as it unfolded, I kind of could predetermine, oh, wait a minute, I thought this was going to be a problem. We may need to do this. Um, I guess that's where I'm coming from is I would challenge coaches more in their preparation to do some of those things because it's hard, Matt. I'm gonna be honest. It's hard in the heat of battle. It's hard in that 1 minute huddle. It's hard in the locker room to sometimes relay those messages. I think in your preparation, it allows you to have things in your scouting report kind of ready to go. Does that make sense? Like in terms
Oh
of,
yeah.
of some of those adjustments, like almost predetermining what some of those things may have to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the preparation is that's you explained that very well because I think sometimes, you know, just being it's kind of like that thing where you say expect the best and prepare for the worst. I as a
Hmm.
coach, I always kind of tried to do that. Like I used to like having like little note cards in my pockets, and one note card would be just maybe my out of bounds plays I felt like we were going to run that night that we saw on film would work, we thought would work. Some set plays, right? Just to remind you, it's almost like a little play sheet, right? But then I'd also usually have a card that had a lot of these if this then this type of statements. And what I
Mm.
mean by that is if this happens, then we're going here. Like in other words, if this kid hurts us with this, then we're going to switch to this defensively. If we're getting killed, because you'd see something on film that would worry you, right?
Hmm.
If we're getting killed by their 2-1 press, then we're going to make this adjustment. So that you weren't super panicked. You already kind of had this in mind. Okay, this might not go well, and if it doesn't, because I think that preparations, like you said, it's hard sometimes to think in this right in the middle of a game when everything's going a million miles an hour, and it helps if you've pre-prepared yourself, or even Shayne just had a plan. Like and I stole this from somebody one time, but I've always used it since because I thought it was so brilliant, and I'd heard it on a podcast, and I use it as a coach. I use it today. I use it with my sixth grade team. I use it all the time. Right? Is when there's a timeout or even halftime, but let's just use timeout because that's a minute, right? You don't have much
Hmm.
time to think. When there's a timeout, the acronym that this guy had was DOPE, DOPE. Okay. And what it stood for was as your team was coming over to the bench, immediately think of defense, offense, personnel, or energy. Okay. So he wanted to ask himself, is the problem we're experiencing right now, do I need to make a defensive adjustment? Do I need to make an offensive adjustment? Do I need to make a personnel adjustment, which means put different players in? Or do
Hmm.
we have an energy problem? Now, if you have an energy problem, you're probably in trouble. I mean, I'm gonna be real honest because I don't know as a coach, other than you just rip your team's butt and you try to light a fire, whatever. Uh, you know, I've watched a couple games this year where I thought that coach just has nothing else he can do. His team's not playing with any kind of energy, any kind of
Hmm.
urgency. They look flat. They look tired. They look dead. They look, that's a problem. But when you think about that acronym, if you can very quickly think, okay, should I make a defensive adjustment? Nah, we're all right there. Can make offense. Yeah, yeah. Personnel. Well, you know what? Maybe I do. These two kids right here, we probably need to sub. Let's try these guys. And it just kind of hurries your thought process along so you can make those calls. Wouldn't you think that's a form of what you're talking about too, right? Just you're preparing yourself for these situations within a game.
Well, I love that, and I love it goes back to the chemistry of the coaching staff because I think a lot of times what happens there is I agree with you. If you have an energy problem, 16 out of 22 games in a year, okay, you may have a group not playing very hard. But let's face it, throughout the course of the year, we've done this long enough. In 22 games, it's realistic that there's going to be a few nights on the schedule where you're just a little flat. The energy's not there. You're trying to maybe it's the atmosphere, maybe it's whatever, maybe it's the trap game, maybe it's
Right.
you know, like I just watched Carolina Duke the other night, and then Carolina turns around and loses to well, it was Clemson or what. You know what I mean? Like it's I see some of those things even at the highest level of basketball. So I love what you're saying, and I think it goes back to some of the preparation and some of the coaching chemistry that I was talking about. Okay, if we have an energy situation, who do we turn to? Do we have do we have a couple guys off the bench that can give us that lift? Sometimes that's a great thing. Remember, and when we grew up in the SVC, the one thing I miss is the Friday, Saturday night. I know some people don't love that, but I used to think it was such a great test in our league where you'd have that Friday, Saturday night. I always felt like Saturday night was such a player's game. You come into the shoot around on Saturday and it was I always felt like we had such a great advantage because I always felt like, we love basketball more than you, and we're tougher than you. We already have
Right.
an advantage on Saturday night of you. You know what I mean? Like it was
Right.
so I love what you're saying there in terms of simplifying it a little bit. And if you have coaches you trust, they can really help organize you there because if you have someone you trust defensively, you turn to them and say, "Are we okay defensively? Yeah, we just need to play harder. We're in
Right.
the right thing. We need to play harder." Or no, hey, so and so can't guard so and so.
Right.
That's your problem right now. Well, then that gives you information as a head coach to formulate a decision, right? So it's so important. It's so important. I've heard you say this on the show so many times. Utilize your coaches.
Mhm.
What's their role? Be specific. I love your what you call that there. I was trying to take notes as you went. If this happens, then we'll
Yeah, it's
if
it's
this
the if this then this statement. You know what I mean? If this
yeah.
happens, then we'll do this.
I love that. So if you already have that in your coaches meeting, because think about this, Matt. When we're sitting here talking basketball like this, we're thinking much clearer, right? We've all been in the
Right.
heat of the
Oh, sure.
battle where, daggone, I wish I had that timeout over. That was nothing short of stupid. I didn't deliver the message very well. I wish I had that huddle over, right? It, but
Mhm.
but if we're having these discussions as coaches and we have great chemistry, then we trust that, hey, this is exactly what we talked about in the meeting the other day. We're having trouble right here. Let's try this. Well, now that's been well thought, right? Even though we're making the decision in about 15 seconds, we're really making it over a couple hours of film and several minutes of a coach's meeting. And
Right.
that's why it's a better decision. You follow the logic in that in terms of leading up to?
Yes. Yeah, I mean it is. It's you've been able to put some thought into it during more of a relaxed situation where you can really think about it and again you get those philosophies sort of on paper. Here's what we're going to do. Like you had mentioned, we had talked situational basketball before a little bit, right? Like
Hmm.
if you know if you're up three with 8 seconds, do you foul? Some people believe you do, some people believe you don't. You can't make that decision in a timeout, I don't feel like, with 8 seconds to go. I mean, that's something that you have to have a philosophy
Very
on.
difficult. Yeah.
Right. And that way, here's the other thing, Shayne, because do you practice it? Right. I mean, do you practice? Do you practice listening to the coach draw something up real quick and go out? We talked about that a couple shows ago, didn't we? Didn't we talk about a little bit of do you ever in practice a timeout where you draw
Hmm.
something up and just to see if players can process that or whatever? Do you have a go-to special play in that situation? So all those things, I think, Shayne, um, go into this. Um, totally shifting gears here. Okay.
Yeah.
Just going down the list here. I want to go back to this only because I saw an article in the Columbus Dispatch a couple weeks back. I think it's been a couple weeks now, but about the shot clock again. Remember we talked about the shot clock, Shayne, back in one of the
Hmm.
earlier shows. So the Dispatch came, this is a January 24th article in the Columbus Dispatch where it basically the title was "It is a time for Ohio to add a shot clock," and it interviewed some coaches and they weighed in. Um, so it's funny how like coaches, not all coaches obviously agree on this. Some want it, some don't. I want to give you a quote from two different coaches, Shayne, in Central Ohio, and then let's just talk about these two quotes a little bit and see if we what we agree with on this. A girls coach from Hilliard Bradley says it makes teams have to be more strategic on what they want to do on both sides of the basketball. The days of running time off the clock need to be over. Okay. So here's a guy in favor of the shot clock. Here's a boys coach from Shekinah Christian says a shorter shot clock would remove much of the strategy. I believe there would be less ball movement, more pick and roll or isolations, because those are the type of actions that can get up a quick shot. Team offenses like motion, flex, Princeton, etc., would likely disappear as they have in the NBA, and the styles will look similar from team to team. To me, part of the beauty of high school basketball is that teams have different offensive and defensive schemes that lead to interesting matchups and potential upsets. Now, to note this, Shayne, it says at the end of this article that the National Federation has voted to allow shot clocks and they recommend the shot clock be at least or they recommend that it be set at 35 seconds. Okay. So just to clarify, the National Federation's recommended shot clock for high school basketball, which by the way, the OHSA would be allowed to adopt this now because the National Federation has given state associations permission to use it. So it's on the OHSA now. It's up to them. Um, and if they adopt it, the recommendation is 35 seconds. So wherever you want to start with this, Shayne, you got one coach that says, "Hey, we need to get rid of this stuff where it's people holding the ball and stalling time." We've got one coach saying, coaches should have whatever strategy they want to be able to utilize. What are your thoughts on this? I'll just throw it to you first.
Well, in all my years of teaching language arts, of I think a persuasive essay, I probably could take both of those quotes and see some truth in them, right? I could probably go whichever side. If you said, "Hey, Shane, go this way or go that way," I could probably do that. I think if I were going to stay consistent on this matter, this is one of the topics, Matt. For some reason, I find myself as more as a fan or as an ambassador of the game. Okay, you know me well enough to know that one of the biggest things that's really bothered me over the last probably decade is things that I feel like are hurting the game in terms of the participation, the numbers, the different things like that. And I've always said I feel like basketball is in need of a shot in the arm. And I've compared it to the 3-point line when we were growing up, and
Mhm.
how the 3-point line has completely changed the game forever. Some good, some bad, depending on who you ask, whatever. But I think it's just been fun, right? I mean,
Right.
the guy to take a turn. And I think about how much I love baseball, and I think about how sometimes the old school was hurt that sport from growing. And I look out and I ask myself, what sports are growing the fastest? And I think of volleyball on the girls' side. And I think, well, why? And I think, well, there's rule changes that have allowed, you know, big and small to play it, and to play it at a higher level, and to play specific positions. And I think of, okay, maybe they've taken a little skill out, which bothers some of the old school, but what has that allowed? That's allowed the better athlete to maybe play. Okay, the more athleticism to take over, the rally scoring. So the game gets faster. Now adults can continue to play it. Men are playing it. Boys are playing it at an all-time high rate, right? If you look back to over the last 15, 20 years. Um, this week at the Super Bowl, I heard someone talking about one of the fastest growing things. I don't know if you've heard this, is girls playing flag football,
Uh-huh.
and it's happening nationwide. So like I see the popularity of the NFL, and I see Steve Young, the Hall of Fame quarterback of the 49ers, just talking about his daughters, and about how he loves that they want to participate and they would just want to know the game. Well, why do you want to play? Well, my dad watches football and I love to watch football with my dad. You know what I mean? I like to
Uh-huh.
get involved in. I'm in athletics and I do that. So I see all these things growing, and basketball is such a great game, but what scares me to death is the fact that the numbers are dropping at an alarming rate. And I'm going and I'm watching junior high tournaments right now during these weeks, and I'm seeing some programs struggling to enter the 7th and 8th grade tournament. I'm seeing teams struggle to have more than 5 or 6 on a roster. I'm seeing more and more teams just not even having JV girls or freshman boys. I mean, we even have one program in our area that doesn't even have a JV boys team.
Right.
And it's all these different things, and I see these numbers dropping, and I'm not saying the shot clock's the fix all, but I guess my first reaction to the shot clock is, yeah, I think it's kind of cool. I think it's fun. I think it'd be something different. I think it would
Right.
add a little, just a little something to the game. So I don't know. That might be a dumb reason to put it in, but that's been my thought now for several years, and that's just my honest answer, almost more as a fan or an ambassador of the game. I don't know. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you're saying on that. I think that we have to think outside the box. I go back to the Major League Baseball rule changes here the last couple of years, right? And I mean, I think you and I would both consider ourselves kind of baseball purists. You know what I mean?
Sure,
We love the game
sure.
and we love the history of the game. But you know what? I kind of like them. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I
Yeah.
kind of like the fact that I don't have to watch a guy throw over 6 times. I kind of like the fact that, like back in Tony La Russa's day, that he's not making a pitching change 3 times an inning. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
I kind of
What was
like,
it Chris Welch said he threw over on Vince Coleman 18 times, and
yeah,
Vince
I
Coleman
mean,
ended up stealing the bag on the 19th?
right, right. I mean, it didn't help anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of like the fact that you can't shift, and I get to see some ground balls get through the infield. I mean, I even kind of like the
Mhm.
fact that, that I know this isn't a baseball show, and here I am, right? But that you started running on second base. I know some people just want to puke when they hear that, when the extra inning rule. But again, I'm tired. I want to go to bed. I don't want to watch 17 innings, right? But what I'm saying is, I think sometimes we have to, you know, check our ego at the door a little bit and say, okay, yeah, maybe we're purists of the game and we want to see things stay the same, but it's okay to make some changes too. And the thing that jumped out at me about it, Shane, too, is with this shot clock, I really think the benefit of the shot clock would not really be throughout the course of the whole game. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I've watched a lot of basketball this year, and I don't know how many 35-second possessions I've seen, truthfully. I mean, look, I mean, think about it. 35 seconds is a long possession. I mean,
Mhm.
if I urge our listeners, as this show is going to come out on Friday morning, if you go out to a game tonight on Friday night and grab your phone and hit your timer when the possession
Mhm.
starts and tell me how many 35-second possessions you're having, because there's not very many, I can promise you. I think where the shot clock would actually help the most is at the end of games. I think what you would see in a 6-point game with like 2.5, 3 minutes left, all right, where now you start to see fouling already. What I'm saying though, in those situations, well, we don't have to foul yet. You know what I mean? We can let's go ahead and defend here. Let's see if we can get a stop. Then we get a
Mhm.
score. Maybe we get one more stop. I think it would cut out some of that at the end of games, give games a better flow. Um, I think that time and score situations at the end of halves would become more interesting, or the end of quarters, because now, if let's say there's 55 seconds, the team oftentimes now will hold for one shot, and there's times where the other team will just stand there and let them hold for one shot, right?
Mhm.
Well, that's kind of boring, right? The fans are there. It's 55 seconds of nothing happening. How much more interesting would it be for that team to have to run a set, to have to run something, knowing that the other team's going to get a possession also?
Well, maybe
Uh,
they want 2 for 1.
the 2-for-1 would come into play. That high schoolers, half the high schoolers don't even know what that means because they never had to deal
Mhm.
with it, right? Where
Mhm.
you're trying to get a shot off in time to where you're guaranteed one more possession due to the shot clock, right? So I think that's where it would really benefit. So out of those two quotes, I would disagree with the one coach that said you would lose out the flex and the motion and the Princeton. You would still see that stuff. You still see flex in the NBA. It's just different looks of it,
Mhm.
right? It's just variations. But what I'm saying is, I don't think it would affect that much. I would tend to agree more with the other guy that says, we need to try to prevent situations where there's just an all out stalling of the basketball, where you're just not wanting to even look to take a shot. I think you take that out, you help the game.
I agree. I think sometimes we're afraid of change, and I know money and all that stuff plays a factor too, but I've learned over the years of being involved in high schools that when you absolutely need money or compliance comes down, money has a way of making itself available. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's just like I see more and more schools, how they getting their kids in free. Well, people are stepping up and saying, "Hey, I want kids
Sure.
to I want kids to go free. Here's some money." Yeah, I mean, it's just there. We live in a day of sponsorship. We live in a lot of different days of technology grants and all sorts of different things. Again, I would love to see basketball step out and just. It's been almost what now 30 years or so since we've tried something different, and I just watch all these other sports pass it up, and I see their numbers going up. I see our numbers going down, and I love the game so much, and that just kind of just eats at me that I don't feel like we're trying.
Uh-huh. Right. No, no. Yeah, I get what you're saying for sure. Well, Shane, I don't know. Did you have anything else on your list, or because
I think we kind of I think we kind of talked about the turnovers. I know that I'm big on the term live ball turnover. I don't know if you have a
uh
comment on that. I don't think all turnovers are created equally. I think sometimes that like kids panic, and when you're playing those high powered offensive groups, you play so well for the first 7 minutes of a quarter, and all of a sudden you turn it over in the backcourt, and the game goes from 4 to 8, and you're like, what happened? I think I think sometimes educating your kids at a 5-second call, a 10-second call isn't the end of the world. I always
Right.
joked I'd rather see you throw it in the 10th row than to throw it to the other team. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because now they're going to go live, and so I mean I know that's easy to say and not always easy to do. I'm not the one out there getting trapped and so forth,
Right.
but that live ball turnover is something that I see as a big thing. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. We did touch on it briefly when I was talking about my biggest offensive problems I've seen, right, with some carelessness and not value. But you're right. I mean, we didn't really dive very deep into that, the differences between the types of turnovers. I think that when I talk about careless turnovers, I'm talking about some of those ones where, you know, either you get cute with the ball, you just get one-handed passes, you get some of these things, or just you're trying to do too much, right? Like I'm going to throw the world's greatest pass right here. I'm going to thread a needle on and throw a 25-foot diagonal pass across instead of maybe just making the easy pass and move and live to see another day, right? But it is but yeah, the live ball turnovers in the backcourt, I mean, those are game changers. Those are swings, oftentimes of. I mean, I saw a play last night where it looked like a team was going to shoot a wide open layup. Um, a kid kind of lost her footing. I don't really want to say, I don't really think it was carelessness, but kind of lost her footing. Ball gets away. Instead of that layup, other team comes up with it, fires it down the floor, shoots a layup on there, and now you've got a 4-point swing, right? And
Sure. Yeah.
that's not wasn't in my mind a careless turnover, but it was one of those live ball turnovers you're talking about that really set
Mhm.
the other team up, and or turnovers at the end of the time and score turnovers, right? I mean, we saw this. I saw this the other night at a game I was at, where a kid had the ball poked loose. With about 8 seconds to go, they fired ahead, and a kid hits a 25-foot three at the buzzer. And now,
That shot goes in almost every
oh,
time.
I
You
know,
know
you
what
just
I'm
know
saying?
it's coming in. And
You
at the
know it's
time,
up.
the team that turned it over was up 8, or no,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was up 9, looking to
Mhm.
go up double digits, right? Going into the
Mhm.
fourth quarter. Instead, now they're up 6, and
Yeah.
they're on the road, and the other team's got momentum, and it's like it's like, oh gosh, you hope that doesn't come back to bite them. In that case, it didn't. That team went on to win, did a good job in the fourth quarter, but it worried you. It worried me when I see that, and I see that momentum swing. So yeah, you're right. I think sometimes when you look at those, and look, Shane, there's those physical and those mental turnovers, right? I mean, like
Mhm.
sometimes it's just a physical turnover. I throw you the ball, it goes through your hands. Well, you didn't
Yeah, you
mean
didn't mean
to do
to.
that.
You just
Yeah,
messed up. Yeah. Yeah.
right. It's to me that's different than, oh, I forgot what we've been working on all week, and coach told me whatever I do, you know, don't throw the ball, don't throw the long parallel pass across court over top of their
Mhm.
6'7" guy, the back here, and I did it anyway. That's the mental mistake. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And I think those sometimes those, you know,
When it carries over to a discipline too, even though it's quote unquote not a turnover, the kid who shoots the somewhat, or shoots the three with 12 seconds to go in the quarter when you're holding for one shot, that's a lack of discipline. That's just simply not doing what the team is trying to
right,
accomplish. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Shane, I did notice one more thing too. I know
Go
we're
ahead.
running long here a little bit, but I did have this written down because someone brought this up, and I don't want to take all day on this because I don't want to get off on a total different tangent. But the fan behavior, that was something coming into the year, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
were
Yeah. Yeah.
concerned about the fan
Yeah.
behavior. Um, what's been your thoughts on that? You've seen a lot of games. Um, Good, bad, same? Has it gotten any better? Gotten worse? What do you feel on that?
Yeah, the one thing I've really tried to pay attention to, as I've moved into administration. I always tried to do this as a teacher, but as an administrator, I'll be honest, it's probably brought it to my attention more. Is we try to take a look at professionalism, and
Right,
the people who are in charge of kind of making sure the game is managed correctly is probably the coaches in terms of the way our kids act, and
right,
then the officials, the way the game is managed and called and conducted throughout. And I think all of us together as a team, we kind of try to de-escalate things. So like what we always talk about in teaching or in education is like Why are you arguing with a junior high kid? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things of de-escalate the situation, and I think of who are your best teachers, Matt, when you go around? They're probably the people who have a great startup or bell ringer, we might call it. They teach bell to bell. They have great rapport with the kids, those types of things, right?
Mhm.
So I, when I bring that into the game, I've tried to really watch this, especially as I stepped away from coaching a year here, and I'm just watching more. The best officials seem to be the ones that have the real good game management skills. They have real good communication with coaches and players, and they don't always bring in the other. I really link this. I think I said this earlier in the year on here. I link a lot of this stuff to a lot of our smaller atmospheres, crowds. I see it more on the girls' side. There's actually a fan that brought that to my attention. I've really watched that, and they were spot on. I see it far more in the quieter gyms. Um, I see it more sometimes in the lower levels, the junior high, and some of those intense situations when you get into some of those. Yeah, I mean, like when I'm watching the 8 versus 1 matchup in junior high tournaments, I don't see very many upset fans. You all of a sudden watch the 4 or 5 matchup,
Mhm.
and it's coming down to the final play. All of a sudden, the intensity rises. But I've seen some of those game management things, and I have not seen it as much on the boys' side, and I just wonder if there isn't something to a little bit bigger crowd, some of the different things. I've watched 3 games this past week. There's some of the biggest crowds I've seen all year, and I'll be honest, I didn't even recognize one fan official interaction. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm guilty of making things too simple sometimes on expanding the zone here, but those are just some of my observations, and I think that the people in charge of the game, coaches included, coaches and officials, when we're able to really keep it about the game and keep the communication about the game and together, that's when I've seen. But I wouldn't say that I've seen anything over the top this year, or I wouldn't call fan behavior worse. I think it's been fine. I I guess it just hasn't jumped out at me. What have you seen?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I haven't seen a lot of things. I think I will say this, and maybe an unpopular thing to say, but I'm just going to say it because I believe it. I think that the games where I've seen the crowds get really worked up have been the games that have been the most physical, where there hasn't been a lot of fouls called.
Sure,
Again, I
that's
go
fair.
back to, I think that you know too many fouls called in a game might catch criticism, but too few fouls called in a game gets people angry. All right, anger gets, I mean, because again, it's just more physical. Kids are falling on the floor. Kids are getting hit. Kids, people start losing their mind. Now, so I do think there's a correlation there. I also think that schools, though, going away from the officials' role in this and going more to an administrative role, which obviously I deal with every night, right? The
Right.
schools that do a better job from an administrative standpoint of understanding crowd control, having more security at games, knowing that, anticipating situations. We had a situation this year where I anticipated our student section might rush the floor. I went over, I talked to them. They waited, they did a great job on that, because so I think you get out ahead of it, right? You don't just wait till it happens and, oh gosh, what happened? You try to think ahead a little bit. So I think administration, in terms of the administrations that have the facilities or the wherewithal to protect officials, get them off the court, get them in a safe environment where they don't have to come back out. Maybe they can leave through a side door. All these different things I think help
Right.
with those crowd control situations. I've seen a couple things that I didn't love, but as a whole, no, I haven't seen anything terribly bad. I've seen a couple fan ejections. I saw one fan ejection real early in a game where a guy on the front row jumped up and kind of yelled at an official, and I mean, official tossed him, and I totally agreed with it. I thought, you can't, if you're going to sit on the front row, you can't jump up and get in an official's face. You know what I mean? If you don't have enough
Yeah, yeah.
sense to sit up top and act that way, at least, you know what I mean, you're going to get ejected. So I was totally for it. I think that, but I've also seen a couple situations where a fan, maybe from the second row from the top, got it in. I thought, we probably avoided that one. I mean, maybe we ought to block that out and just do our thing. So, but as a whole, I think that officials that I've seen this year have handled things pretty well. Honestly, I have been more impressed with officiating this year than I have been in years previous, and I'd like to think the
Maybe it's because you're not coaching it. You're
no,
not rooting
there
for a
you go.
particular team.
No, right. Well, I wasn't coached last year either, though. In all fairness,
Right.
but yeah. No, I think maybe the rule change has encouraged officials to call a few more fouls and has loosened them
Mhm.
up a little bit. Because early in the year I didn't see it because I think it took some getting used to. Now I am seeing it.
Yeah.
But no, I think as a whole, I haven't seen anything that like scares me from a crowd control too much. You know what I mean? I've seen a
Mhm.
couple situations where after games, some schools haven't done a real good job of maybe keeping their, making sure that everyone clears the floor before the fans come out, things like that. But yeah, no, as a whole, I think it's been pretty good. I know that was, if you remember, we talked about that early in the year because that was a big deal, right? That the OHSA was really talking about, and at least in our area, I think for the most part, it's been good. Shane, I'm not even going to really offer a specific closing thought because I know this has just kind of been one of those random thoughts shows. It's been fun talking X's and O's. It's been fun talking some of these situations. I know we've got coming up. I know we're going to do some stuff we're going to do a show that talks a little bit about tournaments. We're going to do a show that talks about the selection process for all leagues. And whatever else as we get into the tournament. Now we're what we're on the verge of the girls tournament. We're probably a week and a half from the boys tournament.
Sunday be the boys
Right.
brackets coming
We'll know
out,
the
right?
brackets Sunday. So we're recording this on a Thursday night. We're going to know the brackets on a Sunday. So a lot of exciting time here in basketball. Before we get off here, what else you got?
The biggest thing that I would throw out on a show like this, you'll hear me say this week to week, but man, it's so true. If you're a coach, and of any age, any level at all, any sport, if you're a leader of any kind, it doesn't have to be sports. Just man, it's so important to just work at your craft. It's so like when we do shows like this, and you get my wheels turning and things like that. I realize just how much that you have to think about what you're doing and think about how do you do it and think about, man, where can I get better at it? Or you start to really look yourself in the mirror and be like, daggone, I wish I'd do that better. You know what I mean? And you got to work to get better and better and better. So I just challenge coaches on that. And I challenge leaders on that. So that's good stuff. Matt, before we get out of here, I will say again, thank you, Dr. Chris Good, for all the support on the YouTube channel, SVC Sports Zone. If you're out there listening on the podcast app, check us out on YouTube. And then don't forget about 100.9 FM at 7:30 in the morning, Monday through Friday. Myself or Matt, one will join JJ Hell for what's called Up and Adam Sports. It's about 10-minute segment. I think you'll enjoy just kind of staying up on your high school scores, some of your college comments, and any particular thing in the sports world going on. It's just kind of a fun thing. Some good old school country, I like to say. You know what I mean? Like it kind of scares me on my age about how much I'm singing along to some of those songs there in the
Yeah,
middle
and
of
and
my.
they're, and they're referring to it as classic country. You know what I mean? I'm like,
And I'm
whoa!
thinking, well, like
I
that was
thought I
just
thought
yesterday. What?
classic country was like
Yeah.
Johnny Cash, man.
But
What
I'm thinking,
classic
did that did
country?
that song come out in 2008? No, no, that was 1992.
Yeah.
So, again, thanks everybody. Expanding the zone, as Matt said, we got a lot coming up, but I hope you enjoyed this show 68 on just some random basketball things that Matt and I have been taking a look at throughout the year. So, on that note, we'll get on out of here. Appreciate everybody for supporting expanding the zone. It's always a lot of fun, and we'll be back to talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.